Hi, welcome to Kingspan Woodworking. My name is James, and today I am going to show you what I did with these 10 job site or compact table saws. These are all 10-inch saws. They're the most popular 10-inch saws on the market, and we, due to demand here, we created a flagship sled in a compact size that perfectly fits all job site saws. And I'm going to show you exactly how I did it, and show you some tips along the way to turn your job site saw into a saw that can make really good precision cuts, enhance your woodworking, and minimize problems that you have. And I think you'll like it. Stay tuned.
So we're going to talk about job site saws. We did a little bit of research, and it turns out about 3/4 of the table saw owners out there have job site saws as opposed to, say, a cabinet saw in their shop. And the problem with job site saws that most of you have probably found out is it just doesn't cut as good, or doesn't have the same quality as a cabinet saw. But that's not entirely true. You can do a lot with a job site saw, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. First thing is all of these job site saws come with a miter gauge, which if yours has one, just throw it away because they aren't any good. When you make crosscuts with this, you have to have a sled. If you have a sled, any kind of sled, you can make a sled. We have a sled as well, which is what I'm going to show you today. But a crosscut sled will give you a perfect cut. It holds the wood, supports the wood, glides through the blade effortlessly, and your cuts are flawless. It's vastly superior to something like that. The original sled that we built, we call it our flagship table saw sled, is this one. You can see it's a little bit big for a job site saw or a compact saw. There's a lot of names for a saw like this. And that's okay. It actually works on the saw. There's no problem, but because it's a little bit oversized compared to the saw, it's unwieldy. And it's a little heavier, and a lot of people don't like that. So a lot of job site saw owners asked us if we would make a more compact version of our sled, and so we did that. So this is our job site flagship sled, and this is what I'm going to show you how to make today. This sled fits any job site saw. You'll see I'm going to do a review in the future. We actually bought the 10 most popular job site saws, and we tested this on all of them, made little minor changes, and just made sure this worked flawlessly on every one of those. And I tested it on half a dozen others too, and I'm pretty confident it'll actually work on every job site saw out there. It's perfect for that. It's smaller than the full-size sled, which means it's lighter. In fact, a lot of people, even if you have a cabinet saw, would prefer something like this because it is smaller, it's lighter weight, easier to move around, but it still has all the same functionality. The fence comes off, we can cut big pieces on it, small pieces on it, really makes no difference. One of the cool features about either one of these sleds is that this is a sled that's really designed to last a lifetime. So the miter bars, for example, the way they go on, is pretty simple to pull these things off, and you can just simply attach this to any table saw you want. So let's say you start woodworking with something smaller like this, and then in the future you move to a bigger saw like a cabinet saw or something like that. You just migrate this to your bigger saw. You can move it as many times as you want. Every time you get a new saw, it'll make the transition over, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Outside of a sled, there's a number of other things that you can do to make this thing cut better. Right off the bat, you'll discover that these job site sleds, they don't cut very well. And that's because the blades that they include in them are about the cheapest blades that they have on the market. They put all their money into building the saw. They just give you the cheapest blade they can. Doesn't really make sense to me. And you have some options. There's some blades that I like. Forest saw blades make some really good blades. But they're kind of expensive. Some of those blades can cost as much as half of the price of the saw. And it does make sense if you're going to invest in a saw, especially if you're going to invest in a sled as well, to spend that kind of money. But there are other blades that are really close. CMT makes really good blades. This blade normally is about 47 bucks. It's on sale now for $28. You can get a blade like this from Taylor Tools, Taylor Toolworks, Tay Tools. I buy a lot of stuff from these guys. They're really good. It's better than buying from Amazon. We do have to buy some things from Amazon. They don't have everything. But this is a really good intermediate blade. It's vastly superior to the blade that comes on here, and it's going to make a world of difference in your cuts. If you want to spend a little more money than that, but less money than, say, a forest blade or one of the super high-end blades, Ridge Carbide also makes good blades. Now, the Ridge Carbide blade is so good, it's a lifetime blade. This blade is something that has C4 carbide, which is the hardest carbide that there is. So it holds the edge the longest, and it also cuts the cleanest. It's the sharpest. They're easy to resharpen. You just keep resharpening it. Depends on how often you use it. We sharpen our blades here probably every couple of months. But we send a lot of plywood through our tools. Maybe, I don't even know, 300 or 400 sheets of plywood probably every 6 months. So we have to sharpen our blades pretty frequently. As a weekend woodworker, you might have to sharpen once a year or less. So consider something like a Ridge Carbide. If you take this saw and you upgrade to a nice CROSSCUT sled and put a quality blade in there, this saw is going to cut amazing. It's going to be a night and day difference to this saw from what you're used to now. It's going to get you probably 95% of the way to the quality of a cabinet saw. And if you are careful with your adjustments, you can do everything on this that you can do on this, no exception. Okay, so I have one more question for you guys before we jump into the build. Is a lot of YouTubers out there, you probably see it, they have sponsorships, where someone will come in and pay them X amount of money and they'll advertise their product in exchange for some money, which is nice because we don't actually make a lot of money on YouTube. I make some okay money where we can get by selling plans and things like that, but YouTube in general doesn't pay very much at all. So sponsorships really kind of pay the bills. For the most part, I've avoided them. I've done sponsorships for like Mag Tools, Mag Switch, places that I've been buying from for years because I really like them, and they came to me. But here's what I want from you. Maybe you can give me some suggestions in the comments. But I was thinking about starting to go after some companies that I like, because typically Chinese companies, like once a day, a Chinese company will call me and say, "Hey, we'd like to send you our drill. We want you to do a video on it," and they're even willing to pay. And I've had a couple of them send me the drills or send me their tools, but they're really poor quality, and I just don't want to display them. I don't want to sit here and sell you something that I just don't like. So what I thought about doing is approaching companies and saying, you know, I've been buying your product for a while, I really like it, and would you like to sponsor a video? So let me know what you think if something like that works. For example, I'm thinking about going after this company, dungarees.com. I buy a lot of Carhartt stuff. I like Carhartt shirts. They have a lot of Carhartt products. Dungarees.com is a company that's been in there forever, and they've always done really good by me, and I'm thinking about approaching them for a sponsorship. So if you think that's a good idea, let me know in the comments. Maybe even go to the website, check it out for yourself, and see what you think. If a bunch of people actually went and bought a shirt from them, then I could call them and say, "Hey, I think you should sponsor a video," then maybe they'll take me seriously. So I don't know, just a thought. Think about it, let me know in the comments. So I'll put the links to these items in the description below, and I'll link Tay Tools. I think maybe I'll even ask Taylor Toolworks if they want to do a sponsorship with me. And you can go check them out. Even if they don't, that's fine. They're good. They're good guys. In fact, it's run by a guy who's a woodworker, and he comes up with a lot of really cool plans and ideas. And I've even taken some of his ideas. His name is Mike Taylor. But I'll put the links to these in the description. This is something that you definitely want to get if you have a job site saw, and I'll put a link to the dungarees.com website that has all the shirts and all the Carhartt stuff that I like, and that'll be in the description below, along with a link to the plans for this sled if you decide you want it. And we're actually going to sell a pre-built sled as well, just like we did with our full-size sled. It was pretty popular. So if you want to jump right into woodworking and you don't want to build your own, that'll be an option down there too.
So heading over to the build, the first thing I did was to create an accurate full-scale template of all of the critical pieces that I need for the sled. This basically shows me where all the holes are, the exact sizes of the pieces, and exact dimensions and everything, so that I can actually use this as a pattern to model up the pieces of the sled accurately. Now, it can be done this way. It can also be done just by measuring, and I'm going to kind of show both of those here. And we also have these templates available if somebody wants to build one of these sleds, and there'll be a link to that in the description below. And so we basically cut out all of the templates into the various pieces. And this is printed on like a heavy cardstock, so it's pretty easy to hold this down on a piece of plywood and trace these pieces out. The hole locations are fairly critical, so having a template is a great way to either check your measurements or to just use it to trace onto the wood and use that itself. The templates, of course, are just kind of part of the program here. The main issue, main thing that you need really are the plans. And we do have a comprehensive set of plans. Shows you step by step how to do the whole build. All of the pieces are individually indicated. They're named, they're sized, they're numbered. So it's pretty easy to identify what's what. If you ever have spare parts, we make spare parts for every one of these. We also, of course, like I said, we do sell the whole sled. And that, of course, is linked in the description below as well. Along with all the detailed measurements and specifications included in the plan are a complete materials list, a cutting list showing how to cut it out of a piece of plywood, complete hardware kit including everything that we used to build this, and links as well to get these things. Alright, so the first step is to cut out all of the plywood. We have used 3/8 inch Baltic birch plywood for this entire project, and you don't even have to have Baltic birch. You can get 3/8 inch plywood for pretty cheap, usually from Home Depot. They've got like flooring, subflooring plywood that's about this thickness, and just about anything works well. Even if it has some warps and stuff in it, won't matter once the fence and things are attached, because it usually ends up being quite flat, and portions of this get glued together. And if you do that on top of any real flat surface, then the sled will become very flat. And if you should decide to buy the sled from us, whether it be the full-size sled or this compact sled, the entire thing is made from premium Baltic birch. It includes every individual piece of hardware, all of the jigs, fixtures, everything that we show with the sled. It's all there, and all of that is premium components as well. Alright, I'm not going to show any more of this cutting. I think you guys know how to cut these things to size. We're going to get right into the build. So we'll actually tackle the most complex part first. These are the zero clearance inserts. Zero clearance inserts are kind of a critical function to this sled. They really make your pieces all get cut out perfectly. No tear out on the bottom, no tear out on the back. That really helps. So the first thing we'll do is we'll mark the center line of the oval, the slot to cut out, and I'm going to set my calipers at 17/32 of an inch. And we're going to translate that length to a square. This is essentially a double square, is what it's called. You can use a couple of different tools here, but this works great. And I'm just going to kind of mark this line here. And that's going to be a center point for me to drill. That's going to be a center point for the hole. It's 17/32 of an inch in from each side. And you can see how I'm doing this here. We will take the 5/16 inch Forstner bit. I'm going to tap it in just enough to see the markings of the rounded part of the drill bit on the wood. And then I'm going to bring a straight edge or a square up to the edge of those markings on each side, and we'll draw a pencil line. We'll do that on both sides, and that's essentially the hole, the slot that we're going to cut that allows the bolt to slide. I'm just going to make the round over at the top part of the slot to make a nice neat transition. I'm just using that Forstner bit to help me do that. And now I'm going to up the size of the Forstner bit. This is going to create the shelf. All this will make sense when we get just a little bit further in. It's good if we're going to use the same hole here. That'll keep everything aligned nicely. And that's the next size up bit. All these sizes and everything are indicated in the plan. You don't have to worry about writing any of these numbers down. And we'll do the same thing. We're going to mark the outside of the mark that we made with the drill bit. And we'll do the same thing here. We'll kind of trace that round. And we'll do the same thing at the top. And that's really it. That's the most complex part of the whole project, really, is that layout. But it's not hard. So the center oval there, or racetrack type shape, we're going to drill that out completely with a Forstner bit. So first thing I'll do is kind of drill each end. And then we're going to just drill the middle out. You got to have a Forstner bit for this, because a Forstner bit works where you can just kind of drill part of where this part of the circle is on the wood and part of the circle is off, and it still goes nice and straight down. It cuts neatly through the wood. So we're removing as much material as we can within this slot. And then we're going to chisel and cut the rest of that out so that we have a nice slot. Any chisel works here. I'll put a link to these chisels if you're interested. They're I get these from Taylor Toolworks. They have some good deals on a lot of their chisels over there. And I roughly cut out all of that with the chisel, and then I've got some sandpaper wrapped around a tongue depressor stick, and I'm just going to sand that a little bit smoother, and that's the center slot. So that's good. Bolt, just a 1/4 inch bolt passes through there, and it's a 5/16 hole, so there's plenty of room. And it doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be functional. And now I'm going to drill halfway down with the larger size Forstner bit. We'll do that on both sides. This one's a 9/16, I believe. We'll have to, I need to consult the plans, or if you get the plans, we'll have to check the plans out and make sure that's what that is. This is a little bit bigger. This is going to be the shelf that holds the head of the bolt down to the base of the sled. And we're going to do the same technique here. We're going to basically chisel this halfway down all the way across. Or I'm sorry, drill it halfway down all the way across and chisel it smooth. You know, one cool thing too, if you decide you want to get the plans or something like that, and you want to build the sled yourself, you don't want to buy it, for example, you could just buy the zero clearance inserts from us if you feel like that's too much trouble and you don't want to make them. Those are for sale on the website as well. And like I mentioned, we're just going to chisel these peaks out, get it nice and flat so that the bolt head goes smoothly back and forth across through this. And this is one of the 3 holes on this zero clearance, and then there's another zero clearance piece as well that has the same 3 holes. So it's pretty simple to do. It's, you know, a little bit time consuming. It might look complex, but it's really not. You know, we use a Forstner bit to help. You just need 2 Forstner bits to accomplish that. Here are all the pieces for the sled fully cut out, including the holes for the zero clearance inserts and the holes for the other components. So let's get to the assembly of the project. We're going to first glue these onto the base. Got the glue at the high flow setting, and it's important to slam this glue as hard as you can down into the wood. That's exactly how that's done. And I flip those upside down, put them on there. I've got it spaced by the thickness or the width of the T-track, and then we're going to hold these down with some weight. When it's done, after maybe 5 or 10 minutes, it gets a little bit set up, I'm going to pull the T-track out because I don't want those things permanently bonded in case glue did squeeze out. And while that's drying, we're going to go ahead and build the back fence. We've got a wide section and a narrow section there. Now I used a 3/4 inch piece for the very back, but you can also glue up 2 3/8 inch pieces for that. And this is a good technique for those who are slightly more refined than me and who don't like slamming and fighting with the glue. You'll never earn your Kung Fu glue certificate if you do it this way, but that's okay. You can certainly do it this way. I do like to apply glue to both sides of the surface, even if it's a fairly thin coat. I feel that gives a better bond and it lasts a little bit longer, a little more secure. Make sure it will basically last forever. This is also the way Type Bond, the Type Bond engineers recommend doing it. And so we'll hold that in place and we'll put some weight on that as well. Obviously that's a little bit of a chore sometimes because once you put weight on a glued surface, they tend to slide around a little bit. So you can optionally put a pin nail in, which I like to do as well. This pin nail is well out of the way of where any blade might pass through, so if you use a Sawstop like I do, you don't have to worry about metal in the blade. Of course, that metal is actually too tiny to activate a Sawstop anyhow. So we'll glue both sides up, pin nail it, and I'll put some weight and I'll set that aside and let that dry. While it's doing that, I do take the time to clean off the excess glue. Sometimes it's easy to cut a straw at a little bit of a diagonal there, and this will scrape all the excess glue right out of those corners. I don't know if you can see that there, but that's pretty handy. You can clean off the straw or just snip it down a bit and keep going. All right, now we're going to jump on the front fence. This is Ryan. He's the boyfriend of my daughter Kavita. He works in the shop full-time with us, and he's turning out to be a very good woodworker. a very good problem solver, which is kind of key to being a woodworker. And this is the front fence like I mentioned. I did use a 3/4 inch piece here, but you can also do this with a glue up of 2 3/8. So you only really have to buy, a half a sheet or a quarter of a sheet of 3/8 to accomplish this project. We get it cut out close to the line, and then we use a sander. You can use a belt sander. You can even use a random orbit sander if you want, but if you've got an oscillating belt sander or spindle sander like this, it makes it a little bit easier to smooth up these edges. And this is really just for looks. And the reason it's tapered down, smaller on the two sides is for weight. This is the safety box that goes in the back, and that's basically what it looks like. We used to use acrylic for the top of these so you could see through, but that really never worked. The acrylic, it's plastic, holds static electricity, and that really, the first time you make a cut, it's just clogged with sawdust and you can't see it. And then sometimes that acrylic will take a bump or a knock if you set the sled down hard, and it'll pop off. Glue just doesn't bond great between acrylic and wood, so we switched this to a wooden top. Whole thing's made of 3/8 inch ply. I like to put glue, and then here again also some pin nails. Pin nails will basically hold it in place nicely until the glue dries. But because of the design, the way it's all held up here, it's locked in pretty tight. It really becomes a very solid box. Once everything is pin nailed and glued, we'll set that aside to dry as well. And that's just a safety block that we're going to put on the back of the back fence. And there's another preview of what we got going on with those parts cut out and pre-assembled a little bit. Here's some of the hardware that we're going to use, and a little bag with all the remainder hardware. We're going to start with the back fence, taking a look at that because it's a little bit different. It's offset more to the left than to the right, which is fine because most of our cuts are done off to the left. And it lines up such that it lines up with the zero clearance section in the base, as so. Now I'm going to flip this thing upside down, and we're going to chamfer these edges. We chamfer them because once this thing is put back in place, sometimes sawdust will be on the bed of the top of the sled, and it'll scoot back over to the fence, and it can block your pieces from sliding all the way back to the fence, kind of giving you an inaccurate cut. Now that sawdust will slide into that chamfer just underneath it, and you can slide your pieces all the way back, and you'll get a more accurate cut. This way your pieces can come all the way back to the fence. Then we're going to install the T-track. Now different T-track comes in different thicknesses, and you'll notice the T-track I have here, even though it's all supposed to be 3/8, this T-track is a tiny bit tall. And that's not really a big deal. We just have to take a small bit of material from beneath it. You can use a router bit like this and shell out the material. I'm just going to use a shoulder plane. Just takes a few seconds. We're literally only talking maybe a 32nd or a 64th of an inch. It's really a very small amount. And I think I probably spent maybe a minute taking all of the material off of each side. So it's pretty quick. I'm going to put a link to this shoulder plane. This is an extremely handy tool, and they're not terribly expensive. It's a great thing to have in a wood shop. We'll test it again after I've cut some. Now if this T-track is below the surface, that's fine. We just can't have it above the surface. And it does line up flush to the front end of the sled. We'll talk about that in a second. But now we'll check it. I'll just use a metal straight edge, and I'll just see. I'll make sure that it's right at or just below the surface of the wood. And if not, I'll hit it again with the shoulder plane. But it is. It's below the surface, no problem. All right, so that's the front end of the sled because I just decided it right now. And this is the front fence. The front fence is the one that's away from you. Because front forward, that's the way the sled pushes. Pushes forward, that's the front. And that T-track lines up at the front because it's got to grip that front fence. So now we'll just put in the screws. Don't pre-drill these. They're small, short screws. But drill them in very slow. They're super easy to strip. I usually drill them in about 3/4 of the way and then finish the last 2 or 3 turns with a screwdriver to make sure they're snug and they don't strip out. If you don't have really good control with your screw gun, don't use a screw gun. Alright, so the front fence is lined up, and this zero clearance inserts are lined up right to the front edge of that. I'm going to trace these. That's one way to do the layout as to where the holes will need to go in the base. You can also use measurements, but I'm just going to use this because it's easier since I made those first. And I'm going to flip this upside down in the same orientation here, so that I'm in the exact same spot that I was just a second ago. And that kind of gives me the walls of it lined up easily. And I'm going to kind of put a little dent in there where the hole goes. And that's going to be like a little hole that allow my drill bit to go perfectly down there. A nice thing if you get the sled from us is everything is cut with lasers or CNCs, so all of the cuts are precise, the sled's exact, super accurate, and there's no work on your part. Alright, now we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to mark the layout for these things on the back fence. So I'm going to line them up at the bottom of the back fence. They are shorter than the back fence, which is fine. I just want them a little bit below the surface there. So I'll just line those up to the bottom and like that. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to just trace them out. And just like the hole locations in the slot on the base, I am putting these at the innermost part of the slot on the back fence. Basically the drill bit diameter or the drill bit radius away from the edge like that. Such that when I do drill it, the drill comes right up to the edge of that slot, the circular slot that I drew. Then I'm going to flip this sled base upside down and use a Forstner bit to drill out a shallow depression to hold my T-nut. T-nut needs to be buried so it's slightly below the surface. This isn't a typical Forstner bit. This one has a drill bit in the middle, which kind of helps me align this perfectly, down that hole. You don't necessarily need this. A regular Forstner bit will work, but I'll put a link to this particular one in the description below in case that's something you'd like to get. And we'll do that with all of the holes. Next, it's back over to the assembly table to install these T-nuts into the bottom of the sled. These nuts are going to hold the bolts that hold down the zero clearance inserts. We can loosen and tighten them. That way we can move them, so that they come up nice and tight and flush up to the edge of our saw blade. So we'll hammer these things all the way in flush. They do need to be below the surface because we don't want these scraping on the table saw. Sometimes you'll drill the Forstner hole a little too deep, and when you drive these in, these will stick through the surface. No problem. Tap them back so that they're flush. You still clear on the bottom. No problem. Once you've done that, come back and put CA glue around the bottom of the T-nut. This is going to lock the T-nut into place, and there really is very little stress on this T-nut, so it doesn't really have to be snugged tight down there. It's not critical. And I'm just checking to make sure that it is indeed below the surface of the wood, and it is. The T-nut's basically 5/16 of an inch thick, and your wood is 6/16 of an inch thick. So you do have a little bit of play, not a ton, but you do have some play. I'm going to go ahead and put the front fence on now. You can put it on later or put it on now. Doesn't really make a difference, but I'm going to put it on now. You notice that T-track had to come all the way to the front because these T-bolts hold the front fence on during normal operation. So we'll put these on, we'll bring it all the way to the front, and we'll go ahead and snug it down. You put a washer, a knob, star knob, and there we go. It's nice and aligned there. We'll tighten this up, and we're going to have to do one more operation. We're going to have to screw this fence down securely. This is a temporary operation, and it's just needed to hold the sled securely together while we are doing the back fence. We'll take these screws out later, but you have to have this secured in very tight now, or you'll have major problems building the sled. You put 6 or 8 of these in. They need to have pilot holes put in, and 2.5-inch deck screws is what I've used, all the way across, and you want to sink them in tight. You don't want this fence, the front fence, to move. You want it to be permanently bonded right there until we decide to remove it later. Let's turn our attention to the miter bars. We'll start preparing those. We're going to put some set screws in on the side and basically just get a Allen wrench and drive these guys all the way in. You have to drive them all the way in so that they're buried and then coming out maybe flush to the other side, and then you'll kind of adjust them, do some micro adjusting until you have a nice snug fit between there and your slot. You don't want any wiggle in your miter bar, but it also has to be able to slide really smoothly forward and backwards. We'll do that with both of these guys. And then it's important to, when you set these in here, we want the screws going that way on this side and the other way on the other side. And that's because once this is bonded to the sled, the set screws no longer matter. This sled will basically hold your T-track, or I'm sorry, your miter bars all the way against one edge of the slots, and they'll stay fitting that way forever. You're not relying on the set screws anymore after that. So we're going to set a little bit of something underneath them, like a penny or a washer, to elevate these things up so they're slightly above the surface of the table saw. That way when we apply a little bit of glue, it's going to be able to stick that to the top of the sled. I want this roughly in the center of the sled, so I'm going to measure back about 1 inch, and I'll do the same on both sides. Measure back about 1 inch, and then we're going to put some glue on it. But before I do that, oh, well, don't forget here, we've got 11 7/8. That's critical. Set your fence at 11 7/8. That's very important. And I almost made a mistake and started gluing this up, and then realized that these things are the wrong way. The countersink is supposed to be down. So I flipped them end for end. That way the set screws are still going the same way and the countersink is down. Ryan caught that, not me. Good thing he did. Good thing he's in the shop, otherwise I would have attached this the wrong way. Okay, so we're going to put some glue. Very, very little glue. Just drops. Maybe 3 drops or 4 drops on each bar. Not much, in case we want to tap these off later to put the sled on a bigger table saw. These are just enough to hold the miter bar onto the sled so that we can pick it up and put the screws in. If you put very little, it's easy to take these off in the future. If you put a ton, it's very hard. Now get your sled flush against that fence. That's why that distance mattered on your fence. And then keep it aligned to the front of your table saw, and then push it down. We'll put some weight on it for a little bit, let it sit. You can even spray a little bit of the instant cure to that adhesive. It's the accelerator for the CA glue. Make it bond right away. Or you can wait 5 minutes and then pick it up. And that's it. We were able to pick them up successfully. That's all that mattered. Now we can screw them in. Here also, we're not going to put any pilot holes. We're just going to drill these or screw these right in. Same thing, these will also strip really easily. So if you don't have good control with your screw gun, just put them in with a screwdriver. And there we go. That's all in. They're in tight and snug. Now I want to go ahead and prep the bottom of the sled. I want to sand the bottom of the sled, make it nice and smooth everywhere. And this is like 150 grit paper, so it's just a little bit coarse because I want some pores open in this. I got all the dust off of it because I want this paste wax to get inside of and kind of impregnate the wood. And there's a good advantage to using wooden miter bars too, because if you do, the wax will stay on them a bit longer. But I've sanded the whole bottom surface. I've thoroughly coated it with paste wax. I let the paste wax dry a little bit till it's hazy and dry, and then I buffed it off. Once you do that, you're going to get a sled that slides very nicely. I could probably just push it right off the edge of the saw like I almost did. That's critical. And it'll stay sliding nicely as long as you have that front fence secured down. All right, remember, this gets lined up with your zero clearance stuff, not centered on the sled. And that chamfer has to go down into the front, just like that. There you go. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Now we're going to clamp that down so that we can screw it in from the bottom. You see I dropped, my poor back fence has a dent in it. Yep, check again to make sure these are lined up good. And then we'll put some pilot holes here as well, because we don't want anything splitting. And we're just going to put 2 screws, one at the far right and one at the far left, in case we have to adjust the fence. 9 times out of 10, we've got to adjust the fence because it's not perfect. So we'll screw this in very snugly. And we're going to do the same on the opposite side, about 1 inch from the edge. We want to spread as good of a spread as we can to get the most accurate layout later, in case we decide to do like the 5-cut method to square it, which I'm not going to do on this one. But I will show you how. I've got videos on it, so we'll teach you how to do that in case you want to do that. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and put these in, the zero clearance inserts. and you can kind of see how these work. Zero clearance inserts are really important because it allows you to change to different blade sizes and slide the zero clearance inserts back up to touching the blade on each side. That way you have no areas where your material can rip out on the bottom. And if you change to a dado blade, you move these out of the way and put them up snug to the dado blade. If you change to a thin kerf blade, you move them up to the thin kerf blade. That way you haven't ruined your sled every time you switch blades. You always have a nice, perfect zero clearance fit. Zero clearance inserts on sleds are a fantastic idea. And we'll put the back ones in as well. You see they don't come all the way to the top. So that's how those work. Now, one important thing is you want to check this back fence. Very often, the back fence will warp a little bit. That's totally normal. It's very rare to see one that's perfectly flat, even if you took the time and precaution to glue it up flat. No big deal. You just take a straight edge like a level, like a box beam level, and clamp it tightly to the fence. And then all the rest of the operations until your zero clearance method and your fence is fully secured, you'll leave this on. That way, when you're done fully securing it, you want to make sure that that's tight all the way across. Once you're done fully securing the fence, you can pull these off and your fence will now stay straight forever. But so don't screw your fence on until you've checked this. And if your fence is not flat and straight, clamp a straight edge to it before you continue. That's important. Mine just so happened to be straight. A lot of times it's not. All right, so we're going to just put this on, and this is just going to go on with CA glue. Nothing special. You may want to knock this off in the future, but usually we don't ever have to. Don't ever have to access anything here. I'll spray a little bit of the accelerator onto that, and I want this to be flush with the top and roughly centered around those bolts. It's not going to fully cover them, but that's okay. It's not really intended to. This is just something so that when the blade passes through the fence, it disappears kind of down into this box, and I don't, put my hand right down where the blade might be. Once I fully cut through the wood, the blade will be in the box, and my hand won't be there, so it'll be, safe to operate. It's just a safety feature. I know some people don't have them, but I highly recommend it. And then we're going to go ahead and take our first cut through the sled. If you did not secure that front fence fully down and you make this cut, your sled will no longer slide. You've made a big mistake and your sled will no longer slide. The front fence has to be secure. Okay, so real quick, I am going to square this fence, or check square first here, with just a square. I'm checking it with the blade. I'm checking a tooth of the blade that points to the left there, and a tooth of the blade that points to the left in the back. And it turns out, even when I zoom up really close, that this just so happens to be perfect. The back, of course, is nice and tight. That's important. And we'll check an up close here, and it's spot on. If for any reason it wasn't, I can unscrew the screw on the left side of the back fence and move the back fence forward or backward a little bit to get this perfect. Now, 99% of the time, this is all the accuracy you will ever need. It's very rare you need accuracy to the, to the thousandth of an inch, but if you decide you want that, use the 5-cut method. I have that in a separate video. I'm going to put a link to it. The 5-cut method will get you accurate to a thousandth of an inch, or maybe a couple thousandths of an inch. Way overkill for woodworking, and I'm going to show you that here by making some test cuts as well. All right, so I've got this squared according to that square and nothing else, and I'm going to check it. Just a simple cross cut. I didn't raise the blade quite high enough there. And the square that I'm going to use to check this is actually a Kynex square. That square itself is a machinist square, stainless steel, and it is accurate to the thousandth of an inch. And take a look at this guy up close. Look at my cut. My cut is perfect. If I zoom in, it's perfect. There is no problem. You simply don't need a cut more accurate than that. It's very rare that you need to make cuts that are accurate to a thousandth of an inch. So if you're satisfied with that cut, then secure the back fence. Remember, you might even still have your straight edge clamp there, so you won't have put your safety block on either. But secure the back fence all the way across, 6 or 7 more screws, 2.5-inch screws. Pre-drill them, put pilot holes in, and then secure them down very tightly. Now the sled will hold itself together and you can take the screws out of the front, but not before. If you do it before, your sled will rack and it won't slide in the tracks. Let's test it. Of course, get the junk out of the way. Yep, still slides really well. Very good. So only after all that would you be able to take the straight edge off the back if you need to, and you can take these screws out of the front. They're no longer necessary. The whole sled is being held together now by the back fence. It wouldn't hold together if the back fence had just 2 screws, but once it's fully screwed, it'll hold together. And that's it, and we're still sliding smoothly. Now you can do a lot of operations without the front fence, like cutting much, much larger pieces than you ordinarily would be able to. So now we'll take a moment and we'll adjust the zero clearance inserts to get them up next to the blade. I slid them up to the blade, right to the teeth, and now I have zero clearance. So I'm going to make the triangle for the picture frame. Pretty simple. I have a piece of wood that I have cut square. You can cut it square on the sled even. Piece of wood I've cut square, and I'm just putting a speed square. I'm going to show you how accurate you can be with something as simple as a speed square. This is a little bit better of a speed square, but I've got a speed square keeping my board here at 45 degrees. I'm going to raise the blade up through the cut because you see this piece of wood I'm cutting is much, much larger than the sled itself would ordinarily take. That's the advantage of having a sled like this. Pull that front piece off and you're really not limited by the size of the piece of wood that you can cut. Alright, so I've got that cut through, and I'm pretty sure that's exactly at 45. I've measured and laid out all the marks for my picture frame triangle, and now I'm going to cut it to size on the sled with the front fence removed. That's our completed picture frame triangle, but I'm just going to check it. I'm going to check how accurate my speed square attempt at cutting a triangle was, and it also looks perfect. Let's check the top of it. This is another Kynex square. I want to make sure this thing's right at 90, and that's dead on at 90 degrees. So we have a perfect picture frame triangle. And once again, you know, if you decide you want a sled that's all completed and you don't want to have to go through the precision work of making it, there's a link in the description below. You can just pick one up already made for you. And we also have a community group I thought I would mention. It's Kings Find Woodworking Community on Facebook. And it's a place where you can go and share your work and get questions answered and just learn more about woodworking and interact with other woodworkers. It's for woodworkers only. And I'll put a link in the description down below in case you're interested in checking it out. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put this picture frame triangle on, and we're going to give it a try. So it fits onto the sled, and it slides all the way back to the fence on the sled. And the holes allow you to use some bolts and attach it with star knobs. And this is a stop block that makes the whole thing work. The stop block, according to the plans, has a dado depth of 5/16 of an inch. So if I push the ruler all the way into the stop block, and then I slide the stop block up to the picture frame triangle, that gives the exact distance that the ruler is away from the edge of the triangle. Then I'm going to slide that forward, making sure the stop block stays in contact with the picture frame triangle and making sure the ruler is buried all the way in the dado. And I'm going to bring the corner of the ruler right up to the blade. I want a right facing tooth to be right at the very peak of the ruler, because we're going to cut the ruler off right here. This basically is the 0 mark. If we're making a measurement for a picture frame, we want the 0 mark to be right at the right edge of that blade. And we'll install some screws. I don't want to sink them fully because I don't want to strip anything out, because I don't want to make another picture frame triangle. So I'm just going to sink them in about 3/4 of the way, and then I'm going to finish those up with a screwdriver. Here again, I'm making sure that the ruler is buried in the dado fully, the whole 5/16, and I'm making sure that that stop block is pushed against the picture frame triangle. That gives us the exact offset distance that ruler is. That ruler sticks out off of the right side of the triangle by exactly 5/16, and using the stop block as a gauge, that helps me get that distance away from the edge of the triangle and makes everything work perfectly. And here I am securing down those screws a little bit better, and I'm going to have to deactivate the brake on the Sawstop because I'm going to cut metal. Now once I've done that, I'm going to just chop that off. Just go nice and slow. Aluminum cuts very much like wood. It doesn't harm the blade at all. And that's cut off at 45 degrees. We don't need that cut off piece because you're not going to make a teeny tiny little picture frame that's only 1 inch long. Your picture frame is obviously much bigger. This just gives us a measurement from the blade back to what size you want this thing. Now, since I have a Sawstop and I don't want to necessarily have that blade come into contact, even slight contact with that metal while I'm cutting, so I'll take the ruler off, take it over to my chop saw, and cut another 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch off of the edge of the ruler. That way, once I resecure the ruler, I'm going to file it so it's not so sharp. Yeah, sometimes when you cut it, it's got sharp, jagged edges, and we don't want to get cut on it, so any file works nicely for that. But this way, when I'm making cuts in the future, that edge of the ruler is well away from the blade, and there's no way that it's going to cause a problem. So I want to put these things back in by hand, the screws back in by hand. I want to make sure I don't strip, and they're going to go track right back in the same holes. Everything's going to line up exactly the same. My ruler's going to be offset like it's supposed to off of the triangle, and you see I have a gap between there and the blade, so the blade will never come in contact with the ruler when I'm making a picture frame. And we don't need that material that was lost because picture frames are always bigger. Okay, so now I need to attach a clamp to the stop block. That's going to clamp the stop block to the ruler so that we can measure our wood. So when we're cutting a frame, we'll use the stop block for the frame, and that'll give us, frame pieces that are the exact same size. We set the stop block once, cut, both pieces of frame, either both the left and right side or both the top and bottom, because those two have to be matching pairs. And there, it locks in everywhere. And you could make this ruler as long as you want, and this thing will lock in well past your sled. Alright, so that's the picture frame triangle. It's done. Let's jump to the last jig or component that will go on this sled, and that is this miter function board. This will turn this sled into effectively a miter saw with the ability to cut angles, any angles that you want. So I'm just going to chop the corner of this off. It lets me get the digital angle finder right up to the edge, and I've marked the layout for the holes. We're going to drill those, and we'll put our bolt in. That holds it. You bring this thing back to the sled fence like you did the other jig, the picture frame jig. Secure that. That's how that rides in there. And we want to make sure that this clears the blade on the right hand side. If this doesn't clear the blade, then you can't glue down the digital angle finder because you cut it off. So if it doesn't clear the blade, chop it off. And you'll notice that if I was to tilt the blade now, it's going to cut that in half. So that's why we have to have a second hole about 1 1/4 inches away there. That's laid out in the plans for you. And you would use the second hole if you're going to make a compound miter cut, because this particular sled can make compound cuts. You can turn your blade at a bevel, a 45-degree bevel, and at a 45-degree miter using this. So you can make some pretty amazing cuts with this sled. Alright, so we got the 2 holes set, and now we're going to glue on this digital angle finder. We want it flush to both edges. That's why I've got those other little blocks there, kind of giving me measurements to get flush to the edges. And I'll put some CA glue, not too much. That's probably a little too much, no big deal, but it glues this really well. This ABS material glues really well to the wood. So does steel. They all glue really well to wood. And those are kind of, I'm using those boards kind of to give me a guide. And then I'll spray a little bit of activator on there to give us an instant cure. And next I'm going to attach this. It's called a miter blade, what I'm calling it. And we'll attach this one as well. Now this one, we don't want to slide it this way and attach it because you're going to block that battery cover. So we'll just slide it up to this point and attach it. And those things are basically giving us the bearing surface for the wood we're going to be cutting a miter on. You'll see how that works in a moment because we're going to use it. And we're going to put that in. We're going to make sure that stays exactly flush with the blade. We'll check it here, holding everything up flush tight. It's important to do that because that's kind of part of your accuracy of the whole system. A little bit of spray. And we're going to glue this to the front. And this is going to be the bearing surface for the wood that you're going to cut. We'll put some CA glue here. And this thing's under no real pressure. It's just kind of a backstop for the whole thing, even though this glue is actually pretty strong. You don't have to worry about it being, not strong enough or too weak. And we'll line that up there, hold that in snug, and give that a little bit of glue, or a little bit of accelerator, I mean. And that's how that works. So we just can dial it whatever angle that we want to cut. Turn it on. It's at 0. You can tear it, reset it at 0. Once it comes all the way back to the back, it stays at 0. And move this up to whatever angle you want. There's 45.15 degrees, accurate to the 100th of a degree. And that's 0.00 degrees, as it should be. Now let's put this in place and see how it works. Once again, a washer and a star knob holds this in place. Make sure that the jig is back flush tight against your fence. And tighten it down. Alright, so we'll loosen the lock knob on it, bring that up. That's how that works. And we'll do a test cut here at, let's say 45 degrees. We'll see how that works. It's pretty accurate, so it takes a second to get it exactly 45, and then we're going to go ahead and lock down the lock knob. Now, obviously the lock knob is not the strongest thing on earth, so you're not going to want to go knocking against that wood. Just kind of set it in place and hold it still. And then you see it sticks off the end of the sled, which is nice to have a removable front fence. And we'll lay our wood down there and we'll give it a cut. And we'll go take a measurement and see just how accurate that miter cut is. Nice thing here is you don't just have to do 45. You can do any angle you want. But let's check 45 and see what that looks like. Checking it with a good quality square here, combination square, and it's spot on. Get a little bit closer, I think, so you can see it. I'm holding this still. My wife's holding it, and I'm trying to film it to give you an indication. But that digital angle finder is extremely accurate. 100th of a degree is a little bit overkill, but whatever. It's nice to have. If you get the sled from us, it comes with that, of course. Everything comes with it. Picture frame gauge and our picture frame jig and the miter jig as well. This is a piece of picture frame molding that I have cut. It's got the picture frame dado cut out of it, and the top is sloped in. It's kind of a little walnut picture frame we made some of. And I'm going to show you how it works. So we'll set this up here. And it can be really long. It can come off the back end of your sled by 6 feet if it need be. You start with the long pieces of molding. You cut one edge at your 45, and then you bring it to the other side, and then you're going to adjust your stop to whatever length that you want. That's why the ruler's there for measurements. Let's say we want this at 5.5 inches. We'll bring the stop up to that point, and then we'll take a cut. You can hold it down. You can use the clamp and hold it down. And there's one piece of the picture frame. If I were to make, I'd make 2 identical ones, one for the top, one for the bottom, or however that goes. And then we'll prep for the next piece for the top, other than just making a couple of small pieces because I want to test it and see how accurate or how nice this picture frame comes out. You can cut pretty small pieces on this. And we'll cut that off. Probably should have started with a longer chunk of frame, but that's all I had left, and I didn't want to make any more picture frame molding. Let me get the and my blade is so dirty. It's kind of fraying the top end of this wood. All right, so there's that, and we'll take a look at it. We'll measure it with the against the gauge here. We got that tight, and we'll take a look up close. So I get it to focus. Sorry, it's hard to focus this camera up close. And there's that. You know, it's perfect. This is a perfect picture frame. And this is done with, you know, a speed square and real simple squaring. And so this is what I'm trying to illustrate. You just don't have to have the 5-cut method necessarily. You don't have to get anything down to the 1,000th of an inch to have, you know, perfect results. Even if I had a hairline gap in that wood where it met, glue would fill it. But there was no gap, so it works fine. You know, when you're done, you just put your sled back or your front fence back on, and that's it. So let's take a look at another product we developed for the sled, and that is a stop block for the back. It's a flip stop, and the nice thing about this flip stop is that it has crosshairs on the side, both sides, and it comes with a 3/8 inch by 16 bolt in there. And the 3/8 by 16 means it's 16 threads per inch. So if we take this and we mark the top of it, or, you know, any one corner, doesn't really matter where, and then you can see the crosshairs on there. If I was to turn this in all the way by one full turn, that moves it in by 1/16 of an inch exactly. And if I turn it in halfway, that moves it in by a 32nd. And if I was turning it in a quarter of the way, that's a 64th of an inch. And we could even do fractions in between, like 128th of an inch. So it's a real accurate way to do a real precision adjustment. And so let's mount this onto the sled. We have to mount the T-track on the sled first. So what I like to do to get an exact position is I'll just go ahead and secure that to the T-track, and I'll set that up with a T-track in a spot such that this comes flush. See, that would be too big of a gap, and if we put the T-track too far back, well, this wouldn't fold flat. So just get it so that it folds flat, and that's your spot. That's probably common sense, I don't know, but I just thought I would mention it. And once you have that in the right spot, then we're just going to screw in the T-track. We've gone through a few different types of stops over the past year, trying to dial this in and you can get just the perfect tool for the job, and I end up having to make my own. But I really like this stop. I really like the function of a flip stop, and there are a lot of good stops out there that are just solid that don't flip, but I like to leave the stop on there and flip up out of the way when I'm not using it. It means a lot to me, because then I can keep an accurate spot marked, move it out of the way, cut something else, then put it back, and then recut the same thing I was cutting before. So that's it, and then this will slide back and forth on here to wherever you need it for your stop. You've got the micro adjust function, and see, this comes all the way to the bottom of the sled, which most stop blocks don't. A lot of them stop, you know, an inch before the bottom of the sled, like these. And it's okay for thicker wood, but if you're cutting a thin piece of wood, that's a problem. But this will cut thin pieces, no problem. And with the micro adjust function, you know, you slide that up, and of course you can flip the stop up out of the way when it's not in use. So I think it's kind of a handy tool. We're going to sell these separately too for anybody who might want some. This one's for a 4-inch fence with T-track on top. I think we're going to sell shorter ones too, like for a 3-inch fence. We might even sell them in a couple colors, I'm not sure, but we have these in stock available right now, and these actually come shipped on all of our new sleds. And what you see here is the complete package. Everything in this is included. Oh, that's Carhartt. I'm going to talk about those guys more later, hopefully. Let's see what the Dungrees.com people do. But all this comes included with the sled package if you were to buy it from us. The picture frame jig, the miter jig, the stop block, all this stuff. So there it is, the full package. That's what it looks like. It's all done. Hope you enjoyed the project, and thanks for watching.